Well, in this video we're going to take what we know about Korea and Japan and think about what the world market might look like. And from the last video we established that the autarky equilibrium price in Korea is $10 and the autarky equilibrium price in Japan is $14. And what we know about trade is that the low price country will become the exporter and the high price country will become the importer. So the export supply curve must come from Korea and the import demand curve is going to come from Japan. And if you look at the domestic market for Korea, as you might imagine, once the Japanese start buying their hats, this is going to drive up the price and a gap will open up between supply in Korea and demand in Korea as the Korean consumers cut back in the face of rising prices. And this is the amount of hats that end up being exported. So the export supply curve simply shows the relationship between any given price above $10 and the size of the gap between supply and demand in Korea. Likewise in Japan, as trade opens up and the Koreans start sending hats to Japan, the price will be pressured downwards, and at any given price, import demand will equal the gap between demand and supply in Japan. So if we can come up with an expression for the size of the gap, then in relation to price, then we have an import demand curve. And so what we do actually is we subtract supply from demand in Japan, and we subtract demand from supply in Korea to find the export supply curve. So here we go. So export supply XS is equal to supply in Korea at any given price minus demand in Korea. And the supply in Korea is represented as Q equals 3P. So Q equals 3P minus the demand is 50 minus 2P. And so we will collect some terms here. I just said Q there to remind you that export supply is a quantity. So we've got 3P, and then we have minus 50, but then we have a minus multiplied by a minus, so we have to remember that's a positive. That's something that people tend to forget when we do this in class. So I'm assuming some people would have, the invisible students would have forgotten it. So anyway, so our export supply curve is equal to 5P minus 50. And we can plot that. We'll do that in the next video. The import demand curve then is going to be demand in Japan minus supply in Japan. So there's our demand minus supply to find out what this gap is at any given price. So the quantity, just to remind you, that's a quantity, is equal to 70 minus 2P, and then subtract the supply curve minus 3P. So we get 70 minus 2P minus 3P is minus 5P. These curves, you can see that the export supply curve has a positive slope of plus 5 and the import demand curve has a slope of negative 5. That's a coincidence, and you can, if you go back to the underlying curves, you can see that I had the same slopes for demand and supply in Japan and Korea. That's a coincidence. It doesn't have to be like that. So that now we have our import demand, and this means that if we want to know what the world price is, we should set export supply equal to import demand, and then we can solve for price and quantity, but we'll do that in the next video.